Hello, everyone. Welcome to another online session. I'm very excited to present today's topic, which is really timely and needed, especially in these difficult times. So we will talk about the effective practices for live online instruction. And today we have with us an expert in this area. We have Dr. Justin from Arizona State University, which is actually my favorite American university. I took some courses with this great university, namely the Teach English Now course, which is one of the greatest and largest courses, TESOL courses. Uh, and Dr. Justin is one of the the primary designers of the course. And I will let him introduce himself to the audience, and then we can start sharing the presentation. So welcome to everyone, Academy Justin.
Thank you.
So would you like to do a little introduction about your background in educational technology, and talk a little bit, if you want, about the 10 course, and then we can start sharing today's topic.
Sure. So I got my PhD in educational technology from Arizona State University in 2013. So it's been a few years. We started designing the Teach English Now courses in 2015, and there are a total of 8 courses, and each one took about 2 months to create, which is really fast if you've ever designed an online course. And so we created all of them in about, I guess, about a year and a half. They're available on Coursera, and all the 8 courses together lead to a TESOL certificate from ASU. And the courses cover things like teaching methods and how to teach grammar and writing, how to teach speaking and listening, how to use technology in the classroom, language acquisition, foundational principles, etc. So it's been very successful. We have over 300,000 people who've taken it now. And it's fun to interact with the learners from all over the world. So.
Yes. So today's topic, as I mentioned earlier, is related to effective practices for live online instruction. You know that teaching live is really challenging, because that means all attendees must be connected. That means teachers must attend the classes and interact with students through video, audio, etc. So I'm very sure that we will learn a lot from today's topic. So the floor is yours. So you can start share your presentation. Just
okay, thank you. So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this topic is when I first started teaching, I was a boring teacher. But that didn't matter because I had students in front of me, and because I was the teacher, the students paid attention to me, right? They did what I asked them to, because that's what students do when the teacher asks them to do something, they do it. And so teaching face-to-face, I could always just sort of walk into the classroom, with some ideas in my head or some pages from the book that I was going to do. And, I could say, okay, we're going to practice this and that. And, and it was easy to get the students to follow along and do what I asked them to do. When I started teaching online, however, the students weren't there in front of me, and it was really easy for the students to tune me out and to not pay attention. And so I had to really rethink the way that I teach and make my teaching much more engaging. And I've been teaching online since before the pandemic. So it wasn't the pandemic that forced me to do this, but I realized that a lot of teachers had never taught live online before the pandemic. And so these things that I've learned through years of teaching online and building online courses hopefully can help you to improve your experience and your students' experience online. So I'm going to talk about 4 areas. The first area is online learning needs. This will talk about things that the students need in order to be successful in online learning. And then I'll talk about using technology as a tool and establishing routines and norms, and then finally enhancing engagement. So let's start with online learning needs. So in the United States, when we teach about, when we train teachers, one of the things that teachers learn about is what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow was a psychologist, and he created this pyramid that is the hierarchy. And basically the idea was that if you don't have all of the things underneath, from the bottom going up, then you won't care about the things above. So the first level there, physiological needs. If you can't breathe, nothing else matters. Food doesn't matter, school doesn't matter, your family doesn't matter. If you can't breathe, many times, if you're drowning in the water, you don't care about anything else except getting air, right? And if you're hungry and you don't have a place to sleep or a place to live, then it's really hard for you to come to school and stay focused. And there are kids in America, for example, who are homeless or whose parents are very poor. And so they don't have food to eat, and maybe they don't have a place to sleep, or they're sleeping, on the floor of a relative's house or in a car. And so if that's their reality, it's really hard for them to focus on school. So Maslow said you had to have those physiological needs before anything else. So Maslow's hierarchy, is the pyramid that's going to be on your left, or on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen, I took Maslow's hierarchy of needs and I sort of replaced all the levels with the things that I think are important for online learning. And so going along with those physiological needs, I have the first level there is equipment needs. And if students don't have the equipment to connect, right? If they don't have an internet connection, if they don't have a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone, they're not going to be able to connect to your live online class. They're not going to be able to get connected with other students. And so that's really the first thing that they need. Maslow's second level was safety needs, the need to be secure and have health. Okay. In online learning, I equate that to the need for an environment that is conducive to learning. Students need a place that's quiet, that they can sit down, that doesn't have distractions, where they can focus on your class. If you are trying to, I've been to Marrakesh, and in Marrakesh you have the market. And if you were trying to do your online class in the market, I don't think it would go very well, because the students wouldn't be able to focus, and they wouldn't be able to, concentrate on what you're teaching them. And so when your students aren't there in front of you, they need to have that environment where they can focus and concentrate. Maslow's third level was the need for love and belonging, for friendship and that sense of connection. And that one's really easy to equate to online learning, because in online learning, students still need those connections. They need that community. They need to be friends with their other class, with the other students in the class. They need that interaction, and they need to have a place that's fun to come to, right? That's fun to learn. So that community is really important. Maslow's fourth level was esteem, and this is the need for respect and for feeling confident about yourself. And I equate that in online learning to self-reliance. So in face-to-face learning, if the student has a question, if their computer's not working or something like that, and you're there with them, right? They just raise their hand and you come and you help them. And teachers really do a lot of problem solving for students, I think. But when your students aren't there with you, they have to have a way to be able to do those things either on their own, or they have to know who they can ask, right? Whether it's a parent or a sibling, whether it's a friend, if they have a roommate, right? They need to know somebody that they can ask for help and help them solve their problems, because the teacher's not there to do it for them. And this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, but this is something that you can actually train the students on how to be self-reliant. So the last level in Maslow's hierarchy is called self-actualization. And this is the need for someone to become better than they are, right? You know, if you're learning to play the piano or learn English, right? You want to become better at playing the piano and learning and speaking or communicating in English. And that's self-actualization. And so remember, I said at the beginning that if you don't have the needs on the bottom, then you won't care about the needs above. So in order for a student to want to become better, in order for a student to want to learn and be in school, they need to have esteem, they need to have love and belonging, they need to feel safe, and they need to have their physiological needs met. And in online learning, if students don't have those four needs, self-reliance, community, environment, and equipment, then they won't really care about what you're doing in the classroom. You know, what you're doing in your live online sessions. And I equated self-actualization to creativity because, as I mentioned before, your class needs to be a place that they want to come, that they want to learn, right? And you know, most of the time that involves the students doing things that aren't boring, right? Doing things that are creative, the projects and assignments. And teachers are very good about doing these things in the classroom. You know, it's easy for me to take some paper and my markers and go into the classroom and say, okay, we're going to write a story and we're going to draw pictures to go with the story. And students have fun with that, right? But then when I move everything to live online classes, if we're not doing any of those things, if we're just doing grammar practices online, or we're doing multiple choice quizzes in Canvas or something like that, then the students aren't going to get the same learning experience and they're not going to have fun. And so as teachers online, we have to figure out how to bring that creativity and bring those projects and assignments into our live online classes. So now I'd like to get a little bit of audience input here and ask you guys a question. For which needs levels can teachers provide the most support? Out of those 5, what do you think are the ones that teachers have the most influence and where teachers can help students the most? And Aziz, if you can tell me what people are saying, maybe online. I'm not sure. I assume they're sharing it in Facebook. So
Yes. So the question again is what level of in the hierarchy, the Maslow hierarchy, that teachers need or students?
Yeah, what level can, in other words, as a teacher, what areas, creativity, self-reliance, community interaction, environment, or equipment needs, which one of these or which of these can I help students with? Can I help students with their equipment needs? Can I help students with their environment? Can I help them with community interaction? Can I help them with self-reliance? Or can I help them with creativity? Which one can I help the most?
So we have Katrina who said that community.
Okay, yeah,
So
I definitely agree with that. Yeah, the main
environment also.
Environment is a little tricky for teachers to help because oftentimes the environment is out of the teacher's control. So if my students are at home, for example, and they're connecting to online to me, then I can't really control their environment at home. I can't go over to their house and tell their younger brothers and sisters to shut up and leave them alone so they can do my class.
Yes.
You know, so of these 5 here, environment and equipment needs, those are the ones that teachers have the hardest time controlling. Many times teachers don't have control over students' equipment. Your students might have a computer at home, they might not. The school might be able to provide a computer or equipment to the students, maybe not. As a teacher, I can't go and get my students' equipment, right? I might be able to tell them, hey, for example, at ASU during the pandemic, the library was able to loan students computers and internet hotspots so that they could connect for students who didn't have one. And so as a teacher, I couldn't give a computer or an internet connection to my students, but I could tell them, hey, the library has these available, go and check it out and see if they have one for you. So I could point them to the right place, but I couldn't really give them equipment. But community and interaction, definitely as a teacher, I can bring in opportunities for students to interact. I can take time in my lessons to build the community, right? Self-reliance, again, I mentioned that you can train your students how to be self-reliant. You can say, hey, what do you do if you can't connect to Zoom? And they say, oh, well, maybe I send a text message to you, or I go get help from my mom and dad, or, I ask my friend who lives next door. You can sort of train them on how they can get help from different people and what they can do if they have a problem. And definitely creativity. The students won't often bring in the creativity on their own. The teachers have to encourage it. The teachers have to make this a part of their instruction. So it's really these top 3, I think, that teachers can influence. But a lot of times teachers get stuck on these bottom ones because if you don't have these, it's hard to do the top 3, right? But these ones often, it's something that you can't control. So I saw a video the other day of someone taking a mop and trying to mop up the ocean and put it into a bucket. And obviously you can't mop up the entire ocean because it's just too much. And that's kind of like what teachers sometimes try to do with the environment and equipment. And so don't try to mop the ocean, but try to focus on the things that you can control. And if there are ways that you can influence the bottom ones, great. You can talk to your school leaders. Maybe they can provide equipment. You can talk to other teachers in the area. Oftentimes teachers will get together through professional organizations, and maybe then they can provide something, or they can encourage the government to provide something. There are different things that teachers can do, but in your individual classes, the top 3 are the ones that you have the most control over. So once you understand the needs that students have in order to be successful online, now let's talk about using technology as a tool. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So a lot of times teachers will have this idea, they find a new app or a new activity that they want to try, and they say, oh, this is great, I'm going to do this with my students. And their focus is only on the app or only on the technology. But really, technology is a tool just like any other tool that you might use. If you're going to build a house, you're going to use a bunch of different tools, and you're going to need to know how to use each tool for the right reasons. I can't, if I'm building a house and I say, well, I love my hammer and I know how to use my hammer, so I'm going to use my hammer for everything, I won't be able to build a house with just a hammer. I can't cut wood. I won't be able to fasten things together, except with nails. And so only using one tool is not going to give me a very good house, and only using one type of technology is not going to give you a very good class. And so you really need to understand different tools and know how to use each tool effectively. Oops, sorry, I went backwards. So you don't want to try and take the shiniest new tool that you have or app and try and fit it into a lesson where it doesn't belong. I always tell teachers that they should focus on their teaching objectives, and then based on those teaching objectives, choose the technology tools that will help them achieve the objectives that they've set out. So here is a list of some of the things that we have to do as teachers online. We have to do learning management, right? We have to be able to do grades and collect assignments and give students papers and different things like that, right? We have to do video conferencing. We often have students do presentations, teachers do presentations. We want students to collaborate. And then we also have other supplemental resources that students can get information and use to do things in our class. So I'd like to go through each of these and see what are some of the tools that you already know and maybe already use that help you accomplish these objectives, and then I'll share some of the ones that I use. So let's start with learning management. What are some of the technology tools that you currently use for learning management?
Learning management systems, you mean, like Google Classroom, like Edmodo.
Google Classroom. Any others?
Edmodo?
Moodle.
No, Edmodo.
Edmodo, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Edmodo is another one. Yeah. I can
Moodle
hear in my head the keys typing as people are answering online.
Yes.
Yeah. Here are some of the ones that I use, or that I have taught the teachers that I know use, and you probably use some of these. Canvas is the one we use at ASU. It's a very good learning management system. It can do quizzes and can do all kinds of different kinds of assignments, and it's very flexible. You can create pages with pictures and videos and all kinds of different things for the students to look at, to read and do. Blackboard is another one that's very similar to Canvas. In fact, ASU used to use Blackboard before they moved over to Canvas. And Aziz, you mentioned Google Classroom. That's one that's very popular as well. Google Classroom syncs really well with Google Drive and Gmail and whatnot. A lot of people use Google services. So Edmodo is another one. I don't have it on here, but there's also Ning, and there's another one called Moodle, Moodle, that's free, yes. That's popular.
So some people mentioned blogs, but this is not counted as a learning management system, right?
It's part of a learning management system. So a learning management system will often include a way to show students information, which is what a blog is, right? Yes. But you also need a way to collect work, assignments that students do. Most learning management systems will have a way for students to interact, like a discussion board or video chat or something like that. And some of those things you can do through a blog. Definitely, if you don't have access to anything else and all you have is a blog, it's better than nothing, for sure. Because you need a place online where students can go to download assignments and read instructions and things, because it's very hard for you to give students paper when you're teaching live online, right? And students need those written instructions. They need the access to that information more than just you telling it to them or sending it to them in an email. So it's important to have a single place where students can go if they need information or have questions about the class. And so a blog is better than nothing, but it does not have some of the same features that these three I have listed here have. So let's move on to video conferencing, because in live online classes, everybody almost does video conferencing. So what do you guys use to do video conferencing? I hear the clickety clack of keys typing in my head. I know you're all answering. Any responses?
Zoom or Microsoft Teams?
Yeah.
We have an answer, Zoom or Microsoft Teams.
Yeah. Zoom is probably the most common one.
Yes.
And I think Zoom, nobody knew what Zoom was really before the pandemic, but now for sure it has become everybody's favorite tool, right?
Yes, it's number one actually.
Yeah, and Microsoft Teams is another good one. There's also Google Meet, which used to be Google Hangouts, and that works well with Google Classroom as well. There are some other ones available. There's one called GoToMeeting, and then there's FaceTime. If everybody's on Apple products, you can do video chats through Facebook. So there are other ways to do video conferencing, but Zoom for sure is one of the most common ones. How about for doing presentations? What do you guys use to do presentations to your students, or to have your students do presentations to you?
We have an answer, Google Slides.
Yeah, that's a very, very common one. It's a good one.
And of course, maybe PowerPoint, no?
Right. I used PowerPoint to create this presentation. Yeah. Some of the ones I've used or had students use also include Prezi. Keynote is like PowerPoint, but for Macintosh computers or Apple computers. And there's a new one, well, it's not new, but it's new to me, called Canva.
Yes.
It's a free online site where you can create presentations and brochures and all kinds of different things. And it's got a lot of built-in pictures and templates, and it's easy for students to use. And of course, they have a free and a paid version, but the free version is still pretty good. So that's one that students like to use. My daughter was just using it the other day to create a presentation for one of her classes because they started school this week. So how about for collaboration? This is a really important teaching objective, right? Getting students to work together, or maybe even for you to work together with other teachers to come up with ideas, or maybe even team teach the same class. What do you guys use for collaboration?
Katerina said Google Docs.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one because it's so easy to use.
So Prezi is for presentation.
Yeah, students can collaborate on Prezi, so they could work together to build a presentation in Prezi. Kind of like they could do the same thing in Google Slides, right? Besides Google Docs, there's also Google Sheets and all of the other Google Suite, as it's called. So you can have students create a spreadsheet together or work on a document. I've had students write stories together where they each, we do what we call chain stories. So one student writes a paragraph and the next student continues it in another paragraph, and they keep going through. Microsoft Teams, of course, allows you to collaborate. And there's also a tool that we use here at ASU called Slack. It's kind of like a chatting tool, but you can share files. You can video conference to each other. And so it's also a good collaboration tool. All right, the last one is supplemental resources. These would be things that other tools that you might use maybe to play games or do assignments with students, or maybe where you have students go to get information about a topic that they're going to talk about in class, etc. So what do you use for your supplemental resources? Basically, what other tools, technology tools, do you use in the classroom?
This might include pictures, no?
Definitely could include pictures. Might include some of those apps everybody likes.
So we have Kahoot, Quizlet.
Yeah, I love Quizlet. I didn't actually put it on my list, but Quizlet is a great one to allow students to create. I have my students create their own flashcards rather than just studying my flashcards. And sometimes I'll have them share their flashcards with other students. But it's a great way for them to learn how to study vocabulary so that they can create flashcards on their own later on. Here are some of the ones that I came up with. Flipgrid is one that's commonly used. Desmos, Khan Academy. Khan Academy has got all kinds of videos and readings about different topics. If students want to learn chemistry or math or all kinds of different information. Socrative is a live polling app. So it's a way that you can quiz students and have them respond live online. I use it for games and for quizzes and all kinds of other things. And of course, there are many, many, many others that I can't fit into the slide, like Quizlet and Kahoot. So. Sorry.
Kahoot is for gamifying the lesson, probably.
Yeah, for review. Kahoot is a game. It's kind of a game. You can ask a question, and then students can answer with their device, right, with their phone.
Yes.
Hold on, sorry, just a second. Sorry, just a second. It's daytime here, so even though I tried to turn off all my distractions, it doesn't happen.
Yes. Distractions are part of the online environment.
Okay. So once you know which tools you're going to try to use, you need to figure out if that tool is right for you. And there are so many different tools out there that it's really hard to know what people are, what's going to work for your class. And so I want to share with you my process for figuring out what the right tool is that works for my situation. Sorry, too many things happening at one time. All right. So there are 3 steps that you use to choose the right tool, or that I use to choose the right tool. The first step is research. And this is where, kind of like what we just did, you might make a list of all the different tools you know of that help you do a certain thing, like collaborate with students, or have students give a presentation, or whatever it is. You might start by making a list, okay? And how do you know which apps will work for what type of objective? Well, you might Google, what's the best app for playing games with students, or what's the best app for doing presentations for live online classes? And you'll get lots of information that way. You might talk to your colleagues at your school, or other teachers in your location, your city, or your country, or even if you're a member of the TESOL International Association, they have these interest sections where you can get on email and send an email that goes to all kinds of other teachers all over the world who are interested in the same topics you are. And many times you get your answers pretty quick about the things that those teachers use. That, you might ask them what book they use for something or whatever. And so that's a great place to ask teachers what types of tools they use for various teaching objectives. So the first thing you need to do is do your research. Step 2 is to experiment. This is where you select a tool and you say, okay, I'm going to try Kahoot, for example, because my friend that teaches over in another school told me that he likes Kahoot and it works great for reviewing things with his students. So I'm going to try it. We're going to review vocabulary today, and I'm going to use Kahoot to see if it works. So you set up the lesson and you try it out, okay? And you might have to try it more than once. Oftentimes when I try something, it doesn't work very well the first time. Maybe I don't know enough about it, or I'm unfamiliar with it. And so when I try to use it, there's some problem or something like that. And so you might want to try things more than once. Make sure that you're familiar with how to use the tool, that you understand what it can do before you say to yourself, oh, this isn't going to work, or oh, this is great. You want to make sure that you try it out a couple of times at least. And then once you've decided that you like that tool, then you're going to adopt that tool. And by adopt, I mean you're going to start using it regularly to do what you need to do in your classroom. So if it's Kahoot and you say, hey, we review content every Friday. So every Friday I'm going to start playing Kahoot games with my students because they really liked it and it helped them learn a lot. That's great. Now you've adopted Kahoot and you can start building it. You can have it, as a tool in your toolbox. Okay. And that's really what you want to do. You don't want to stick or be stuck with just one technology tool. You want to assemble what I call your technology toolbox, okay? And you want to have a bunch of different tools that you can use to do what you need to do as a teacher and have your students accomplish your learning objectives, okay? When you're building your toolbox, you don't want to go too fast, because trying to do too many tools at one time is just going to confuse you and the students. And you'll probably decide that you don't like any of them, when really, if you had just given each one some time, you might actually decide that you like it. So try one tool at a time. Don't try to do too many, maybe two. Figure out if you like those tools. And if you do, put them into your toolbox and then start using them in your lessons. Okay, and then every so often, technology is always changing. So every so often, you want to make sure that you're looking at the tools that you're using and deciding, hey, are there other ones out there that are better, right? Maybe I need to get rid of some of the old ones and start using some new ones. And maybe some of the new ones don't work very well, and so you keep using the old ones. But you need to be evaluating your tools regularly and seeing if you like them and how they work. Things can change too. Socrative used to be all completely free, and then Socrative is the live polling app that I mentioned, and it's one of the apps I love to use. And it used to be free, and then things changed and they started having a paid version. And so then the free one had some limits, like how many students you could have, et cetera. And so sometimes you have to sort of change what you're doing to see, to fit you have to try out new tools when the old ones change. So now we've talked about online learning needs and we've talked about technology as a tool. So now I'd like to talk about establishing routines and norms. And this is really sort of the procedural part of your online classes, okay? Just in case you're not familiar with the term norm, we use it a lot in the US for education. And so teachers tend to know what it is, but outside of the US, I don't know how well it's used. So a norm is just something that's typical or usual, that's standard for your class. So, and it might be different for every teacher and even different for classes with the same teacher, right? So you might have one class where all the students have a high level of ability, and so the norm for that class is different than the norm for another class, right? But you might have older students and younger students, and so for the younger students, you have to do something different than what you would do with the older students. But the norm is that the younger students know what's going on, they know what to expect, and the older students know what to expect as well, because it's something that they're used to, it's something that that's normal for them. The word norm comes from normal. So you want to establish your routines and norms, okay? Routines are something that you do maybe in every class, but at least something that you do regularly, okay? And there's something that are performed as a part of a regular procedure. This picture that I have here on the right side of the screen is something that you might see hanging up in an elementary school classroom or a primary school, right? Where the students know as soon as they come into the class, they put their name tag on, they take their chair off the top of their desk, they hang up their backpack, they put any homework that they had in wherever it's supposed to go, they sharpen their pencils, and then they sit down and they do their first morning work, whatever that is, right? And so the students know what they're supposed to do. That's the routine. They do it every morning as soon as they come in the classroom. And so those types of things really help your online classes go smoothly. And a lot of teachers do these routines in their face-to-face classrooms, But then when they go and they teach online, they sort of forget about the routines because the routines have to be different. And so your routines could be different for every teacher. And again, even for classes with the same teacher, you might have different routines based on the needs of your students, okay? So this was my experience transitioning to remote teaching, okay? I had my in-person teaching, which was going really well. And then when they said at the beginning of the pandemic, okay, we're going to teach remote via Zoom, I started making lesson plans to do that. And I had some really good ideas. And then what I actually was able to do in those live sessions and compared with what I planned wasn't the same. And then what the students actually learned wasn't the same as what I had planned for them to learn and what I taught them. So as you're thinking about live online teaching and what do you need to do for your norms and your routines, the first thing you want to think of is what worked in your in-person classes, okay? If you teach younger children and you had students coming in and every morning they hang up their backpack and they sit down and you have something written out on the board that they're supposed to do, that keeps them quiet or whatever, that works great in person. How do you do that online, right? That's the next consideration, is what's different now that you're online. So typically when I start a class, I'll have some type of a discussion question on the board. And I ask the students to write down some ideas that they want to talk about related to my discussion question. And so then after they've had, while students are coming in, they're writing down their ideas, I'm taking attendance, maybe 5 minutes after the class has started, then I'll say, okay, let's discuss, and I'll put them in pairs and have them talk, and then I'll take the 2 pairs and put 2 pairs together. So now there are 4 people in the group and they'll talk, and then I'll have them share ideas with the whole class. We call that a think pair share. And I change the discussion question every time we do this, and the students know when they see that discussion question on the board what they need to do. I don't have to tell them because they've been taught, they've been trained what to do, right? So how do I do that online? Well, when I moved to doing that online, at first it was almost like I had never done it before. The students didn't know what to do because it was different. I put the discussion question into the chat box, or sometimes I share my screen and I've got the discussion question on a slide. And so I share the slide on the screen and I say, and I tell them, okay, here's the question, I want you to discuss it. And so they would sit down, and maybe, they were sitting by themselves in their house. So, how well did they think of something? I don't know. Maybe they decided they were going to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or play a video game instead of doing what I asked them to do. But after about 5 minutes, I said, okay, now I'm going to put you together with another student, and I want you to talk about your ideas. And they said, well, how are you going to do that? And I said, well, we have breakout rooms. And they're like, what are breakout rooms? And so then I had to train them how to go into breakout rooms and how to get with another student. So we did that. And then I put them into the groups of 4 using breakout rooms. And then we shared the ideas as a class. And the first 2 or 3 times that we did it, it took like 25 minutes. It was a long time. It took half the class almost. But after that, it took less and less time until, eventually I was doing it just like I had done it in my in-person classes, because now the students were trained with the new routine. So those are some things that you need to think about now that you're teaching online, is how do you change your routines, right? Another thing that you can do is you can involve students in establishing the routines and norms. When the students have input into what the routines are and the norms are, they often will follow them much easier, and they'll be happier about it, because it's not just something that the teacher told them to do, it's something that they decided they wanted to do as part of a routine. So you could easily just ask students, what do you think we should do when we first come into the Zoom session that would make it smooth and a good learning experience for everybody, and get their ideas and see what they say. So I'd like to ask you, what are some of the unique topics or situations when you're teaching online that you might need to develop routines and norms for?
Punctuality, maybe.
Huh?
Punctuality, be on time.
Yeah, punctuality. Okay. So how do you get students to come to your Zoom meetings on time? Okay, good. I have that same problem with in-person classes too. How do you get your students to come to the classes in line or on time? Any others?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, one of the ones that I had to deal with when I moved to online teaching was, how do you do homework? How do students submit assignments, right? When everything's online and they can't turn in physical papers. We talked about the LMS before, right? And so if you're using an LMS, maybe it's easy for you. But I had to come up with some ideas of things that students could do, because they couldn't give me physical papers, right? They couldn't, if I said, hey, create a poster and give it to me, they couldn't physically give me a paper poster. So I started to use digital formats, where they could create a poster either through a website or using like Microsoft Word, and then they could submit that into our learning management system. When assignments are due. So it's easy to say the assignment is due at the beginning of next class, but when you have your live online sessions and the students aren't giving you the papers in the class, sometimes it's a lot harder for them to recognize the due date, right? And so I started having my assignments due at a regular time each week. And I would say, okay, this assignment, we have assignments we do every week. And I said, this assignment is always due on Tuesday, and so they would just know that on Tuesday they had to turn it in, and then I would grade it on Wednesday. This one was probably the hardest for me, and that was to provide all the instructions and documents with on-demand access. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I was teaching in person, I would tell the students what I wanted them to do. And sometimes I would give them a piece of paper or a handout that had the instructions on it. But the students would always have questions. Teacher, what are we supposed to do next, right? Because it's hard for students to remember all the steps that I told them, especially if they weren't paying attention. And sometimes students just have a hard time remembering instructions anyway. But when you're teaching online, it's a lot harder for them to ask questions. It's not like they could call you on the phone, I guess, but it's hard for them to get instant answers like they would in person. And so what I tried to do is write down all the instructions for an assignment and all the things that I thought they might ask questions about. And I would put that into my learning management system on a page. And so when I would introduce the assignment, I could just tell the students, go to this page, read the instructions. If you have any questions, let me know. I would have all the different things that they would need to do the assignment there, links and documents to download, etc. And they can access it anytime they want, even if they're doing their homework at 3 o'clock in the morning. They don't have to call me or email me and wait for me to respond. They have it all right there. And so that's really helped a lot better. They don't ask nearly as many questions, and they're able to get things done a lot easier. So, and now I actually do that with my in-person classes as well. Another one that you often have to deal with is communication. Again, students just can't ask you a question in person, so how do you accommodate student needs, and how do you communicate with students? Well, one of the things that I do is I try to have different ways for students to communicate with me. So they can send me an email. They can, I have a Google Voice number. It gives me I don't know if it's available outside of the United States, but in America, at least, it gives me a number where if they call that number and they leave a message, or they text that number, it sends it to my email. And so it's a really easy way for students to contact me, but I don't have to give them my cell phone number. They can just use that Google Voice number. And that Google Voice number stays with me no matter where I'm teaching. If I change my cell phone company or whatever, my number doesn't change because it's a Google Voice number. Students can also, I put a discussion board in our LMS where students can ask questions there as well. So that's another way that they can communicate. I give them regular times to communicate with me. I do office hours. So, I say, hey, I'll be on Zoom Thursdays at 7 o'clock. If you want to meet with me and ask me questions live, you can do it then. I tell them also when I will respond to email. And I try to respond as quickly as I can. I'm usually pretty good about responding to email. But, I tell them, I give them a time, and I say, hey, if I don't answer within 24 hours, send me another email, or, maybe it's 48 hours or whatever time works for you. But students know what to expect. And so they don't feel anxious because they know that you'll respond within a day or two, whatever it is. Another common one that's different online is asking questions. How do students ask questions when you're doing your live online session? Zoom has a way for students to raise hands, but if you're not using Zoom or you're using something else and a student has a question, how do they let you know that they want to ask a question, right? So one of the things that I started doing was pausing in my teaching, like I've been doing here, and I would say, okay, does anybody have any questions so far? And I would just wait for a couple minutes and give students time to ask questions. I also, like I said before, I have a Q&A as part of our LMS. And so the students can go on there and they can post a question. I often will use the chat feature. So I'll have the Zoom chat up and they can post questions in the chat, and so I'm looking at the chat on the computer while I'm teaching or whatever it is. And so if they have a question, I can see it. And then it's important, again, to monitor the question, especially if they're not asking questions live. It's important to monitor those, whether it's email or the discussion board, and then respond as quickly as you can. This one was a big one for teaching online, is your video and audio, okay? Now, instead of being face-to-face and having to just sit still, students are at home. So how do they know when it's okay to mute or unmute their microphone? And how do they know when they have to turn their video camera on or off, right? And so again, it's just establishing routines. You might say, hey, everybody, when you join Zoom at the beginning of the class, make sure your camera is on and your microphone is off, right? So that way you don't get a bunch of background noise or dogs barking or whatever it is that interrupts the class, but you can see that the students are all paying attention. Sometimes you have to be careful though. I had a student at ASU who never turned his camera on in class. And so I asked him during office hours one time, I said, why don't you ever turn your camera on when I ask all the students to turn their cameras on? And because it was just him and me in office hours, he turned his camera on and he was sitting in the bathroom on the toilet, not using the toilet, but that was the only place in the house that he could go that was quiet, where he got that environment I was talking about. And he didn't want other students to see that he was sitting in the bathroom, so he didn't turn his camera on, right?
For him.
Yeah, it's embarrassing for him. And so sometimes you have to be careful about forcing students to turn their camera on. You just want to make sure that you know each student's situation. And if a student doesn't turn their camera on, maybe, for that class, you just don't worry about it. And then when you have a chance, you ask that student, individually, hey, why didn't you turn your camera on? Maybe they just didn't comb their hair that day, and so they felt a little embarrassed, but that's not a big deal. Or maybe their camera was broken, or, but it's just making sure that you're communicating with students about that. It's also really important to know how to manage your students' audio and video as the host. So, Zoom, for example, has features where you can mute everybody. And so if you have a student who doesn't know how to do it or isn't doing it, right, then you can mute them. You also have the option to ask someone to turn on their microphone or to turn on their camera. You can't force them to do it, but you can send them a note in Zoom. You can say, ask them to turn on their camera, and it will send them a message saying, hey, the host wants you to turn on your camera. And so then students might be reminded to turn their cameras on. Maybe they just forgot, right? Another one is group work. How do you do group work when everybody is in a different location? A lot of the group work I do, I moved into offline. So the students are doing it through Google Docs or something else, or maybe they're calling each other on the phone and working together, but it's not during our live online classes. But I do some group work still in my live sessions, okay? So some of it I moved out, and some of it I do using breakout rooms. So if you're familiar with Zoom and you have, I think breakout rooms are only available with a paid account, I'm not sure. But if you have breakout rooms in Zoom, it allows you to put different people into different rooms. And then as the host, you can go back and forth and monitor them. So it's actually kind of funny. When I was teaching face-to-face and I would do group work, I would tell all the students, okay, you're going to get together and you're going to talk about this thing. And I only want you to talk in English, right? Because they're learning English. So then I would hear them speaking in a different language when in the classroom, but I was working with another group and I couldn't really go over there, right? And so then I would hear them speaking, Arabic or Korean or whatever language for the country that I was working in. And I'd go over to that group. And as I got closer to that group, they'd see me coming and they would switch into English like they'd been speaking English the whole time, right? But with breakout rooms, they don't know that I'm coming. So there's been a few times where I'll go into a breakout room in order to check on the students and they'll all be speaking their native language. And I'll be like, oh, you guys weren't speaking English. And they're, oh yeah, And so now it kind of encourages them to speak English because they don't know when I'm going to come in and check on them. So that's one thing that I thought was a silver lining for all from all this pandemic online teaching we've had to do is they're having to speak English, they're having to speak English more in their groups. Another one that's difficult in online, like I said before, is helping students be self-reliant, right? Helping students, providing that student support. So again, as a teacher, they can't just raise their hand. You can't just walk over to them and help them. You've got to find ways to provide them the help that they need or help them find the help that they need, okay? So one of the best things that you can do for your students if you're teaching online is to help the students figure out who around them can help them if they have a problem. Teach them how to go and ask their parents, right? Maybe you have a Zoom session with the parents if you're teaching young kids so that the parents know how to do Zoom. And then when the kids have problems, then the parents can help them, right? Maybe you give them the phone number for the tech support help desk at your school, or you teach them the websites to go to if they can't connect to Zoom or whatever it is. But you, as a teacher, you can help sort of train them on what they can do when they need support with technology or with something else that you're doing in class. And another thing that's really important online is to give them as much help and support at the beginning as you can. So in a face-to-face classroom, you might be able to just sort of teach them how to use the computer and do the technology there in the classroom. But online, you have to show them ahead of time. So you might create like a video tutorial that shows them how to use Kahoot, right? Before you try to do Kahoot. You make sure that you give them all the instructions for the assignment, all written down at the beginning, so then they can look at that and then ask you if they have questions, instead of you having to send out another email and another email and another announcement with more information because maybe you forgot it the first time or something like that. I already mentioned this, but holding practice sessions with students and parents and other community members to help them understand how to use the technology. So a lot of schools in America have what they call a parents' night, where the parents come and they get to sit in the classroom and they learn what the students are going to learn for that year, and they meet the teacher, etc. And you can do that with a Zoom class the same way, and sort of train the parents and others on how to use the technology. I mentioned before about involving students in establishing your routines and your norms. And again, the main reason for this is that when students have helped to establish the routines and the norms, it's not just something that the teacher told them to do. It's something that they decided they would do, right? It's also why I have my students help make the rules for the class. If they make a rule that everybody has to be sitting in their seat or has to have their camera on before class starts, and they don't follow the rule, I can say, hey, you guys made the rule. And like, oh yeah, we know. and so they follow it more than if it's just something that I told them to do. So in order to involve students in establishing the norms, this is the process that I use, and I just wanted to share it with you. So the first step is to explain to the students why routines and norms are important. I've already explained it to you guys, but if the students know, hey, by having these routines, our class goes faster, we learn more English, classes are more fun, they're going to want to do them, right? Then somehow I'll put the students into groups. Usually I use breakout rooms, but you don't have to use breakout rooms if you don't have them. You could have them do it offline, or you could have them call each other on the phone, or get together in a Google Hangout or something outside of Zoom, or have the students make their own Zoom account, and then they could just use their own Zoom room to meet with other students, right? But so you send the students into groups and you have them make a list of the routines and norms they think are important. And then you create that final list as an entire class. And usually I'll do this as a class session. So I'll say, I might say before class, you four get together, create your list of routines that you think are important. And then when they come to class, then we talk about it as a whole class. And then it's really important also to revisit those routines and make sure that, as things change, that the routines change as well. So for example, here at ASU, we're going to start teaching in person again. And so the routines that we have are going to be different, right? And so I might have to revisit them. Or you might be teaching maybe sometimes in person, sometimes online, and so you need two sets of routines. Or, maybe you have different situations on different days of the week, and so you have different routines for different days of the week. It's important to just look at your routines and revise them as you need. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is enhancing engagement. And this is where I want to talk about that community and that interaction and really keeping the students engaged. Because if you think about it, when they would come into your face-to-face class, maybe you have class for 75 minutes, right? Students are in the classroom for 75 minutes, but they're not just sitting down for 75 minutes. I hope not. My students are moving around, they're doing activities, they're talking to each other, they're working on projects, they're doing all these kind of things. And I can't just do all of those same things in a live online session because it wouldn't make sense. It would be really hard for the students to just sit there for 75 minutes. And so I had to sort of rethink the way that I structure my live online sessions. So here's an example of how I might break up a live online session into some smaller chunks. If the class is 75 minutes, you might do intros and announcements and then some type of warm-up and instruction. And then you're going to give students a chance to ask questions and to stretch, right? Then you might do some guided practice where they're working together with you and you're reviewing things with them. And then you might do group work in breakout rooms, or you might say, okay, we're going to stop the live online session here. Everybody go out and work in your group and then come back in 20 minutes and we'll finish up our online session, right? So they're not just sitting there in front of their camera for 75 minutes. Other things that I've done to break up the live online sessions, sometimes I actually don't even have a class where I have all the students come at once, but I'll invite the students to sign up for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? And I'll work with the students one-on-one, because that's what the students really need. Sometimes they don't need to, the speaking practice or the chance to collaborate. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they just need to get help from the teacher. And so maybe a better use of the live online session time is for you to provide that help for those students who need it. So you might do it individually, or sometimes you might put a group of students into a breakout room and other students are working on their session, in the main room, and then you go and help those students in the breakout room. I talked about breakout rooms before, but if if you aren't familiar with them, there are those separate online rooms, and you can control which room students go into. And as the host, you can go back and forth between those rooms. So if you have breakout rooms, I definitely encourage you to use them. If you don't have breakout rooms, though, there are other things you can do, like having students get their own Zoom accounts. Their basic Zoom account is free, and then the students can invite other students to come into their Zoom room and work together, or they could use a Google Meet or some other technology, or even calling people on the phone, or even, if you have students who live close to each other, right, then maybe they get together at somebody's house and they do the live class together, but they're able to work in group, do their group work in person. Maybe that's an option too, depending on the situation where you are. Another important aspect of enhancing engagement is to use active learning strategies. And these are strategies that get the students actively learning. Some of these ideas came from the Center for Teaching Innovation at Cornell University. I've got the link down there at the bottom. But the idea of an active learning strategy is that students are their brains are actively involved in the learning, and their actual neurons in their brains, the cells, are changing as they learn. And so that's how you know learning happens. So one of the strategies that I shared already is this idea of a think, pair, share. And so you ask the students a question, and you give them the chance to sort of think about it on their own. And then you put them into pairs, and you have them share their answers with their partner. And then you put them, often I'll put them into larger groups. So I'll take 2 pairs and put them together. So I get 4 in a group, and I'll have them share their answers. And then I'll have all of those groups come together and share their answers with the entire class. If you have a really large class, like maybe you have 40, 50 students, sometimes I don't do the entire class, but I'll just stop after they share with the 4, or maybe I'll take the 4 and put them together as in the 8, right? You could also do a think, pair, share online if you're doing something asynchronous, which means not at the same time, like everybody's not getting together at the same time. So I've put the question in a discussion board and said, think about the question and post your answers. And then I'll have 2 students work together to answer the question as a presentation or an assignment or something like that. So there are ways to do it where it's asynchronous as well. Another active learning strategy is problem solving, or sometimes called a case study. So this is where you would give students a problem or a situation, and then you have them come up with solutions in pairs or in a small group. And often you'll have to make sure you give them a set amount of time, or they might just keep working until, forever. You can also sort of turn it into a game and say, okay, let's see who comes up with the answer first, right? Let me give you just a story, because I like telling stories. When I was in high school, I took I think it was my calculus class. I can't remember. Anyway, I took calculus. And in that class, the math teacher said, he came up to us with this problem. He said, my next door neighbor wants to build a slanting driveway, right? He wants to build a place to put his trailer. The trailer hooks to the back of the car, but his driveway is angled. So when he backs down, when he brings his truck down the driveway, it always scrapes the bottom. And so he said that his neighbor wants to know what angle to build the driveway or to fix the driveway so that the trailer won't scrape. And we had the length of the trailer and the length of the truck and all of this. And I still remember the problem that he gave us, that he wanted us to solve. I don't remember the answer. I don't remember anything else about calculus class, but I remember that problem that he gave us because it was an active learning strategy. So to me, that's a good example of how active learning strategies can get students involved with the learning, especially with something like math or maybe even learning English, grammar, something like that. Another thing to check or enhancing engagement is to check for understanding. And we will often call this polling. So we do this in the classroom all the time, right? We ask students to raise their hand, how many have done whatever, okay? But when you're teaching online, how do you do this? Well, you could do something as simple as asking students to raise their hand in front of the camera, or use the Zoom feature to raise their hands. You could have a Socrative or a Kahoot where they're sending their answers in. You could even just have them writing their answers down on a piece of paper, right, and showing it to the students, or showing it to the camera. So, but it's important that you're pausing and that you're checking for understanding to make sure that the students don't have questions and that they've understood. So some of your technology options are here. Socrative is the one that I have talked about before that I use. There's also iClicker, there's Google Slides, Facebook even, or Zoom, and then there's Poll Everywhere, okay? But sometimes in live online sessions, just having students hold it up to the camera is all you need. They don't have to have all this fancy technology, especially if you don't have it available. So to summarize and recap, to make sure that you remember the most important points, we talked about online learning needs, and you need to think about where you can best support your students. And then we talked about technology as a tool and how technology can support your teaching objectives. And then we talked about establishing routines and norms. And so the question for you to think about is, how will being online change your routines and norms? And then lastly, we talked about enhancing engagement. So think about how you can adjust your teaching to keep students engaged and actively learning. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I think we have a few minutes for questions, if there are any.
Yes, this is very interesting, really. I like the image you shared, the transition to online learning. It's to the point.
Mm-hmm.
There is often a tension between theory and practice. What we plan and what we do. There is we often what we plan contradicts sometimes with what we do in the, especially online or in the actual classroom.
Right.
So before I move to the comments or questions from the audience, I have a quick reactions about the presentation.
Okay.
So you said that teachers need to choose one or two tools and then practice them, because if they choose a lot of technological tools, they will get confused, right?
Yes.
What do you think teachers, for example, what are the best technology models? I like to mention the summer or the TPAC, or do you think they can be useful in this regard to help teachers infuse technology into their practices?
Yeah. And they're not in, SAMR and TPAC are not in, they aren't against each other. They're sort of different models for different purposes. So TPAC stands for technological pedagogical content knowledge, and it's sort of the place where the teacher understands what they're teaching. That's the content knowledge. They understand how they're teaching. That's the pedagogical knowledge. And then the technology part is they understand how the technology can help them accomplish the other two, right? And so if you're learning how to use Kahoot and you say to yourself, well, I like Kahoot, but how would I use it in my classroom? You don't have that TPAC yet, right? But if you say, well, I review grammar with my students and I could make it more fun by doing it with Kahoot, now you have a little bit of that technological knowledge where you know how to use that tool to accomplish a teaching objective. And so any tool that you want to try in your classroom as a teacher, you need to understand how to use that tool to accomplish your teaching objective. You need to have that TPAC. And so building that TPAC comes, a lot of times it comes through practice. You might see another teacher use it, right? And so you see how it works first, and then you go to try it on your own. And so you build up your TPAC that way. Or you might just hear about this tool and say, well, let's just see what it does, right? And so you play around with it on your own and learn how to use it. And then you learn how to use it with students, right? And so you slowly build up your knowledge about that tool. And so I never, like, I go to conferences or I go to this webinar, something like this, right? And I hear about Socrative or this other tool. I never just the next day go in my classroom and use it. I have to learn about that tool first and figure out how it helps me accomplish one of my teaching objectives before I experiment with it in the classroom. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then SAMR, SAMR, stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and I forget the R, but it's essentially redefinition. Thank you. So those are levels of integrating technology into an activity. So if you're using an ebook instead of a paper book, that's just substituting, right? You're not changing the activity at all. You're just now using a digital resource instead of a paper resource. And maybe that's enough for that situation, but technology can do a lot more than just the substitution, right? So the A is augmentation. So now with an ebook, as an example, you might also be able to include links or videos or pictures that you couldn't include in the paper book, right? And so now the students have more information, more resources, because you've used this digital resource. So now their resources are augmented, okay? But again, the purpose of the book is still the same. It's still a textbook. The students are still reading it as their main source of information. So that's S and A. M, modification, that would be where you're taking the activity of a textbook and you're changing what the students are doing, right? Now the technology is changing the activity. So maybe instead of the students using a textbook as a resource, right? Now they're using a series of websites, authentic resources that you found, and they're using all of those to gather information rather than getting information from one source, right? And so you've modified the activity and sort of given the students a little bit more freedom in where they get their information. And then the R, redefinition, that's where you're using the technology to its full potential. So instead of having the students use a list of websites that you've created, you might have them create their own website, right? Where they're using information and they're creating now a resource that other students can use, right?
Yes.
So different types of different models for different purposes.
Yes. So in this last stage of the summer model, there is a product.
Mm-hmm. Usually, yeah.
Yes, there is a product.
Yeah. I like to have my students creating things. I like to have them not just learning English, but using English, right? So oftentimes to know that they have learned English and that they've used English, they have to produce something. They have to produce writing or speaking or, and so I have them oftentimes doing projects. I use a lot of project-based learning in my classes.
Great. Justin, you also mentioned the breakout rooms.
Mm-hmm.
So I am not sure how it is done on Zoom. It is on the PED account, but do you think it is good for differentiating instruction?
Yes, it can be. So breakout rooms, so if you think about a face-to-face class, oftentimes teachers will do something where they'll say to, they'll have three groups of students, right? They have their low students, middle students, and their high students. And so the high students, you can just say to them, here's what you guys need to do, go do it. And they'll just go do it because they understand what they're supposed to do and they have the ability. And the middle students, you can say, here's what you need to do. Here's some help for you. Maybe there's a teacher's aide or somebody, or I'm going to help you for 5 minutes and get you started, right? But they should mostly be able to do what you're going to do. And then you have the low group who really won't be able to do anything unless you're there to help them, right? And so when you have that in your class for face-to-face, oftentimes you spend most of your time working with that low group. And maybe it's not a group, right? Maybe you're just going around to those 5 or 6 students who are the low-level students, but you're spending most of your time helping them, and the other students are just working, right? Doing what you've asked them to do. And so we can sort of simulate that in live online sessions by using breakout rooms where you can work with some students while other students are doing something else, but then you can also easily go back and check on those other students to see, hey, do you have any questions, et cetera, and then you can go back into the main breakout room to help the low-level students, for example. So that's one way you can differentiate instruction. But in online learning, I often will move that offline. And so, for example, I might have only the low-level students come to the live online session and we work together. And the other students are doing it on their own. And I've put all the instructions and everything on our website, our LMS. And so the students are getting everything there, right? I can also differentiate instruction by giving more resources and more information in the LMS. So vocabulary is a good example. In order to read a chapter of one of our books, for example, students have to know a certain list of words. And my high-level students probably already know those words, but the low-level students probably don't. So I can put resources for the low-level students to practice those words and to learn them. Maybe it's Quizlet, maybe it's a practice worksheet or whatever it is, but I can put those resources there on the LMS. The low-level students can go and spend time doing those before we read the chapter and get the knowledge that they need to bring them up to the same level as the high-level students. So there are lots of different ways to differentiate instruction, but technology is really useful because it allows you to provide the resources and that scaffolding that the lower-level students need.
Yes, as you said at the very beginning, it depends on the teaching objectives, not on the technology itself, on the teaching objectives, and then we can choose the appropriate technology that is suitable for our teaching context.
Yeah.
That was really a great session. So many people really was thanking you about this session. It was really full of different information related to best practices, online practices. Justin, do you have any future projects? Maybe another, are you thinking of developing another MOOC, like the Teach English Now course? Or do you think of writing a book or something? What are your future projects?
That's a good question. So I have future projects. I mean, I'm always working on something. I have written a couple of books about, one of them was about teaching online called 50 Ways to Teach Online. Another one is a book I wrote with the same guy that we worked on Teach English Now together called 50 Ways to Learn a Language. And another one is 100 Ways to Teach Language Online. Those are available on Amazon, wherever. So you can look those up if you're interested. We also did build another course, but it's not on Coursera. and it's called Learning How to Learn a Language. It's on Udemy right now.
Yes.
And if you go to languagewarriors.com, you can get information about the course and other resources
So
that go with the
are you
course.
working with Dr. Sheen? No?
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
I saw. I saw this language warrior. I saw this course.
Yeah. So that's another course that we build. We have other courses that we're planning to build, but right now we're in the middle of other things as well, so haven't had time. The pandemic has sort of taken away our time.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah.
So thank you so much for this great session. We learned a lot from you.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We hope to have you in a future webinar. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.